if you can see my screen. Okay, great. Thanks everyone for taking a few minutes to join us this evening. I think Inez and Martha gave a really good setup here. What we want to do is talk a little bit through how the city budgets, the kinds of services that the City of Monterey Park provides, and how it is doing, and as Inez mentioned, is developing its budget for out years right now, and to take a look at some of the things the city is kind of considering in light of its needs. So with that, also, and I think we took care of the housekeeping. If folks want to raise their hand for questions, I think we'll try and do most of the questions at the end. But I'm happy to take things as we go if that works. We don't have such a large group that we have to manage it so tightly. So with that, one of the things that we always talk about with cities is the city a contract city, or is it what's called a full service city? And the City of Monterey Park is what is called a full service city. That means it has its own police department, its own fire department. It provides kind of like the full suite of services that a municipality can provide. There are actually dozens, if not, over 100 cities in the state that are what are called contract cities. So they contract with the sheriff's department for their public safety. They contract a lot of those services out. The City of Monterey Park maintains its own services and thus exerts, kind of the full amount of control over how those services are delivered. And the city council has a great deal of say in how those things are administered. Going along with that, there's kind of two different dimensions to this. There's the services such as police, fire, water services, other kinds of public works, but there's also quite a lot of infrastructure that the city has to maintain. And to just get a sense of that, in the City of Monterey Park, the city is responsible for nearly 120 miles worth of streets. There's 3 fire stations with 62 employees. There's a police station that has 110 employees. We have a library. There are 14 parks with over 100 acres, a swimming pool, and many other assets that the city has to maintain. Some of that infrastructure, and this is not limited to Monterey Park, but most of LA County and a lot of Southern California, many of these cities are decades old, if not older. And as such, a lot of that infrastructure may date back to the early days of the city. There was a recent report done by road engineers that rated the condition nearly 1/3 of Monterey Park streets and roads as just fair or even poor or very poor, in need of repair for potholes and other kinds of dimensions. The city must also comply with the Clean Water Act to maintain aging pipes, which, as I mentioned, some may be decades old or even older. And many local buildings, including the fire station, the library, neighborhood parks, are in need of essential health and safety repairs. Again, this is not just something that's limited to Monterey Park, but something that all cities face. But Monterey Park is taking a strong look at how to upgrade some of these things. It leads to some tough decisions. You see here a park that was in Monterey Park. This is a park that was in need of some of these health and safety repairs, and unfortunately had to be removed because it was too costly to make those repairs and keep it safe for the children and families that utilize it. There's other examples, the swimming pools that have been left empty. There's a recent storm, and there was a storm passing through my neighborhood today. This was not from today, but from a few months ago. Some of the buildings are aging and in need of greater maintenance than the city's currently able to provide. There's also a rising demand and calls for service. So we talked about some of the bricks and mortar, the buildings and the assets that the city has. There's also a great demand, again, on many municipalities for emergency services. So on average, each year, there's more than 4,300 calls to 911 in Monterey Park for medical emergencies like heart attacks, strokes, car accidents, and others. Last year, there were more than 1,400 emergency calls related to homeless individuals and more than 1,100 calls for service related to folks experiencing a mental health crisis. There were also more than 220 robberies and burglaries in Monterey Park and a 5-year high in car theft. And again, these are trends that are impacting cities across Southern California and Los Angeles. But just to give folks a sense of the scope and scale, there's many calls every day for medical emergencies and also other issues, and that's a demand on the police and fire and emergency services that the city itself maintains. The public's, if you think about spending per capita, how much the city is spending per person on public safety. If you combine police and fire, Monterey Park is comparable to many neighboring cities, not as high as Pasadena, but in the same realm. Some other cities, not at the top, certainly not at the bottom. So what is the city's budget? When we talk about the city's budget for the current fiscal year is $115 million. Nearly 60% of those dollars are spent in dedicated funds, funds that the city is committed to. It comes in via grants or other things, or it's already committed to certain kinds of services. What is called the general fund budget, which is that remaining 41% of the budget. This is a place that the city council has a lot of latitude over, that the residents can give feedback, and there is some ability to emphasize some priorities over others. So if we think about just that 40%, because 60% of it is spoken for, if we think just about the 40% that's remaining, within that 40%, 58% of those dollars are spent for public safety, police, fire, emergency medical services. Another 14% are for public works, your streets, your pipes, capital improvements, things of that nature. And then everything else is about 28%, again, of the 40%. So that would include the Parks and Rec Department, everything that goes into administering the city, planning, code enforcement, those kinds of things. This all has to come out, again, of this 41% of the budget, of the total budget. The city has had many recent accomplishments, and we're just going to highlight a few. The city's implemented a homeless plan that runs through next year, minimized interruptions to essential city services, and preserved the city's reserves through COVID-19, a significant accomplishment. The city has improved water quality, and it's sought to help businesses recover from COVID, also attracting new ones, of course, to try and prevent a loss of tax revenue. So it's been a very challenging time for all of us. And certainly for cities, and Monterey Park has had some pretty notable accomplishments during that time. And so what is the city doing to try and manage its budget? The city has slowed replacement of staffing losses from the financial crisis in 2008. That includes both permanent and part-time reductions, and I'll touch on that a little bit more. But the financial crisis from now nearly 15 years ago is something that greatly impacted cities all across the state. Many have not recovered their staffing levels since then, and Monterey Park is another example of that. The city also implemented a pension bond, which is going to save the city $50 million over the coming decades. I mentioned the playground that had been removed. The city's invested in technology and cybersecurity because local governments, cities, counties, schools are increasing targets of criminals online, cyber ransomware, and other kinds of things. And the city's invested to kind of safeguard itself from that. The city is still recovering from the 2008 recession. It's been a good steward of its resources, but there are costs that go up over time. And you can also note that the city has fewer full-time employees than it did 15 years ago. So there's a sense that the city is definitely trying to do more with less. And so that's a little bit about what the city spends its money on. So how is the city funded? Well, 60% of the city's general fund revenues come from sales and property taxes. Sales taxes are paid on a lot of purchases. You go to your Rite Aid, your CVS, other kinds of stores. There's a percentage added onto those purchases that benefits various levels of government, the city, and the county, and the state. And I'll expound on that a little bit. There's then property taxes, which are paid by residents as well as business landowners. Some folks may remember Proposition 13, which is, I think over 50 years old now, over 40, is from the 1970s. Prop 13 capped property taxes in the state as a benefit to homeowners. But as a result, those taxes, they grow very, very slowly because properties are only reassessed when they're sold. So while it's a significant chunk of the money that's used to fund the city, it's not able to grow to keep pace with any kinds of rising expenses. Basically every city is financed a little bit differently. Some are much more reliant on property taxes. There are cities, like I think Anaheim being an example, that have large tourism. They get quite a lot of dollars from their hotel taxes, what are called TOT taxes. That's a pretty small percentage in Monterey Park. I think the big thing to understand is that almost 2/3 of the dollars are coming from property tax, which is relatively fixed, and then the sales tax. There's also a limit on how high sales taxes can be. The limit by law in the state is 10.25%. And Monterey Park is not at that level. Many surrounding cities are. Monterey Park's sales tax is actually tied for the lowest in LA County. It's tied with a number of other cities at 9.5%. There are 50 cities in the county that charge a higher rate than does Monterey Park. And another thing that I think is a really important takeaway is that Monterey Park receives just a small fraction of those dollars. Of the 9.5%, not all of that comes back to the city to fund the kinds of items we talked about at the beginning: the police, the fire, the playgrounds, and so forth. In fact, Monterey Park, if you break down that 9.5%, 6% goes to the state, 2.5% goes to the county, and just 1% comes to Monterey Park. So it's not quite a round figure, with the 9.5, but if you think about it, just 1% of the 9.5% comes back to the city. And if you think about that cap, that 10.25% cap, Monterey Park is at 9.5%. Other agencies like the County of Los Angeles can raise sales taxes that count against our city's cap, but they can do that with no requirement that a majority of those revenues come back to benefit the residents of Monterey Park. So in essence, the County of Los Angeles can levy a tax, and has. It would benefit the residents of the county, but the County Board of Supervisors would adjudicate where those funds go, and there's no guarantee that they come back to Monterey Park. And in fact, often does not come back to Monterey Park. The county has passed a number of revenue enhancements, tax increases in recent years. And in fact, though they had to try a couple times with voters, the county has eventually passed every revenue measure they have put forth over the last 20 years or so. There was a 1/2-cent transportation tax passed in 2008 that was called Measure R. There was an additional 1/2-cent transportation tax, Measure M, that passed in 2016. There was an earlier effort that had come short, and there's a 1/4-cent tax for homeless services that was called Measure H. So some folks may remember voting on these. These are taxes that are paid and collected by residents across the county, including in Monterey Park. Those dollars roll up to the County of Los Angeles, and then the county board decides where they go. But analysis by the city's financial experts show that if you look at just measures R and M, just the transportation taxes, in the last year, there was $7 million generated towards those tax measures in the city of Monterey Park. $7 million generated within the city, but the city only received a benefit of $1.6 million back. So essentially, Monterey Park taxpayers and folks that shop, who may not live in our city, but that shop in Monterey Park, pay these taxes. They go up to the county. It is not a one-for-one exchange. Not all of those resources may come back to Monterey Park. So again, the city keeps only a fraction of the sales taxes that are collected. Of the 7.3 million measures R&M are estimated to generate in 2022, the city's estimated to see only 1.6 million in return. That's a forecast. So one of the things that the city has been considering, and is not a done deal, but is a possible revenue measure for the city to support services that are just in Monterey Park. That could not be taken by Sacramento, the state capital, would not go all over the county, would be generated locally, and would stay focused to spend just on Monterey Park priorities. It would go to anything that is funded in the general fund, but that would include 911 response for police, fire, and paramedic, local drinking water, keeping public areas safe and clean, and again, anything that the council were to decide as a priority that is paid for out of the general fund. It would be a potential general revenue enhancement. What would that do to our dollar bill graphic? So as a reminder, 9.5%, 6 to the state, 2.5 to the county, 1 to Monterey Park. A 3/4% increase, bringing the city to 10.25%, would keep the state and county share the same, but Monterey Park would retain then 1.75%. So again, 100% of those dollars generated in the city would stay to benefit the city residents and the services. It would also bring the city equal in rate to neighboring cities like Pasadena, Montebello, and Alhambra, and it would generate a total of about $6 million each year. One other thing to note is the sales taxes, while they're collected in the city, because so many people come to shop in Monterey Park or visit restaurants here, actually 57% of the sales taxes generated here are estimated to be paid by non-residents, people who do not live in Monterey Park who are coming here to shop or eat or otherwise spend. And how would this 3/4 cent increase translate to common purchases? Well, if you're buying a bottle of Tide that costs $12, currently you would pay $1.14 in tax. If such a measure were enacted, it would be $1.23 or a 9-cent increase. On a $20 purchase, that's a 15-cent increase. And on a little bit more expensive purchase, $130, it would be just under $1.98. There would also be a lot of items that would be exempt. Most groceries, prescriptions, and many medical supplies, items bought with CalFresh benefits and utilities. These things are exempt from sales tax. No new taxes would be applied to such purchases. And any measure advanced would include strict accountability provisions, including annual independent audits, expenditure reports that the public could review, and finally, once again, all funds would have to be used for Monterey Park City Services as part of the general fund. So that's the end of our presentation, but we have a number of representatives from the city who can answer specific questions about what the city's doing now or its plans for the future. And